Alistair Goss.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. 793 Sergeant Goss, Toxton Police Force.
Sergeant Goss, on the 23rd of March this year, did you arrest Benjamin John Easter of number 20 The Glade, Grattan St. Peters, for assaulting a police officer, that is to say, for assaulting you?
I did.
In the cul-de-sac that is called The Glade?
That is correct.
Now, why did you go to The Glade on that day, Mr. Goss?
On a routine round.
Did you go in order to see Easter?
Not specifically.
Did you have any business with him?
I had, but it wasn't urgent.
What business had you with him?
I'd had complaints from a local farmer, Mr. Ling, at Preston Barton, that this gang of boys known as the ThunderBolts had been riding their motorcycles across his fields.
Now, why did you wish to talk directly to Easter about this?
He was the so-called leader of the gang, and I'd recently decided to employ a policy of trying to exercise some influence on the gang's activities through him.
This was a new policy of yours?
It was.
And would this explain the fact that you appeared to be paying Easter more attention than other members of the gang?
It would.
And were you in fact paying him more attention?
I was, yes.
And so you went to the Glade, you saw Easter, and you decided to raise this complaint with him?
That is correct.
Was there any other reason why you wished to see Easter?
None.
Now, would you tell the court how your conversation went with Easter before the blows that preceded his arrest?
He was standing by the side of the road talking to one of the gang, Tucker. Tucker was mending his machine by the pavement, which I pointed out to him was illegal.
But you took no action?
No. I wanted to talk to Easter. I asked him about the riding through the meadows round Preston Barton, and he denied all knowledge of it, as he always did, unless caught in the act. He asked me why I had it in for him. Why not talk to the other lads? I said he was supposed to be the leader, and it was easier to deal with one person than a group. And again he said, why had I got it in for him? Was it because of my daughter? He used a particularly revolting way of putting it.
Could you tell the court what words he used about your daughter?
I don't like to.
Did he say, is it because I am poking your daughter?
He did.
That must have upset you, Sergeant.
It did.
Did it also anger you?
It did, yes.
And what did you say to him?
I said he was a disgusting foul-mouthed rat, and that if I was not on duty, I would not hesitate to show him what I thought of him.
What did he say to that?
He said, any time, copper, any time. So I suggested he get his friend Lippet to fix us up at the youth club. It all seems rather infantile now. But you understand, I was very angry.
He knew how to anger you?
Oh, yes, they all knew. They knew there was only one way in which they could arouse my anger, and they used it. And never to greater advantage to themselves than on that day.
And then what happened?
We talked some more. And then he struck me hard on the shoulder, and I recoiled. I saw that he was going to go for me, and so I decided to take him straight into the station.
Did you hit him at all?
I did, yes.
How many times?
Once.
Why did you hit him?
As a warning.
That you weren't going to let him get away with anything?
That is correct.
Where did you hit him?
In the solar plexus. He doubled up and I got him by the hair. It was longer then. He's tidied himself up. And then I took him over to the car.
Now, once inside the car, did you hit him again?
No, I didn't touch him.
Or was his face bleeding, his mouth? Did you notice?
It was.
Did you notice that he had a broken tooth?
He pointed it out to me in the car on the way to the station.
Well, how did it happen, do you know?
He tripped as he entered the car.
Now, let us recapitulate on a point. Are you, and were you at the time, convinced that Easter was offering violence to you that constituted an assault and merited you using force to defend yourself and to secure his arrest?
I was convinced of it, and I still am.
And do you consider that your prosecution of him was equally merited?
Certainly.
You entered into it in good faith?
Yes.
And with the approval of your superior officers?
Yes.
Now, you said just now that they all knew how to arouse your anger. Were there occasions when other members of this gang joined in?
Several occasions. And not just myself, but my wife. They used to come and stand at the gate of our cottage. They had a particularly repulsive song which they sang about my daughter at the top of their voices, the gang.
Why did you never take any legal action against them?
Because I didn't want all this brought out. I would have done anything not to have had all this.
Sergeant Goss?
Yes, I'm sorry. Carry on.
Now, how many times were you called out during the 2 years prior to Easter's arrest in order to deal with complaints about this gang?
43 times in 2 years.
Now, was that purely to deal with complaints about these boys, complaints from residents in the village?
It was.
And did you always answer a call from the village?
Always. Whenever I could, if I was in.
And were they always justified?
They were, yes.
And was there always something you could do?
Far from it. On only 19 occasions did I take any further action. And on only 3 occasions did anything actually come into court.
And did these 3 occasions result in convictions?
They did.
So you didn't believe in bringing a prosecution lightly?
I never believe in bringing a prosecution lightly.
Now, Sergeant, at the time when you arrested Easter, did you know that your daughter was pregnant?
No.
Did you suspect it?
No.
Did you even have a faint suspicion?
Listen, I didn't even suspect she was on those sort of terms with Easter.
Yes, I see. So why did you object to your daughter going out with Easter?
Well, it can be no secret that I didn't like the young man. I knew from the start that he was using her in order to get at myself and my wife. I didn't know what he might do to her, just out of spite for me. The bikes. I was feared of the bikes. I know how those boys ride those bikes. I was very scared for her sake some evenings.
Is this why you checked Easter's bike on the
Aye,
occasion?
it is. I went over it with a fine tooth comb once simply for that reason, and I'd do it again. But first and foremost, I knew he wasn't genuine. I knew why he was doing it. To get at me.
Thank you very much, Sergeant.
Sergeant Gosh, you say you suggested to Easter that he should get his friend Lippett to fix us up at the youth club. Now, what did you go on to say?
I said, if a match could be made officially, I would be happy to meet him when it was convenient for him.
And did he accept your challenge?
No, he did not.
And then did you then taunt him?
No.
What did you say when he declined?
I warned him. I told him to cut out the foul language and to call off his cronies.
Then why did he hit you?
I don't think I can be expected to know why he hit me.
Well, what had you said immediately prior to this alleged blow?
I can't remember at that exact moment.
But he can't just have hit you out of the blue.
Is that a question?
Was his blow apparently unprovoked?
It was.
Were you, as several of the witnesses have testified, shoving him towards a flight of steps?
I was not.
Well, what did you originally take him aside to talk about?
Mr. Link's complaints about riding across his meadow.
His meadows, yes. Well, was this really such a personal complaint to Benny Easter that you couldn't talk about it in front of Tucker?
It was my policy to deal with Easter alone.
Evidently it was. Now, let us turn to another element of this conversation with Easter, the alleged obscenity about your daughter. Now, why was this not mentioned at the earlier trial?
Because I didn't want my daughter's name dragged into it.
Did you arrange with Easter not to mention it?
No.
Yet Easter has told us earlier that you knew that your daughter was pregnant by him.
I knew no such thing.
Don't worry, you said. I know all about it.
I never said anything like that.
Were the words of that song that the gang is supposed to have sang outside your house, what were they? Oh, come, Sergeant, they caused you and your wife deep distress. You must remember them.
Is this relevant?
Yes, my lord. What possible bearing on this case can the words of this song have?
You state?
My lord, the defendant has given evidence that the plaintiff and others sang foul songs outside his house. Now, this has been disputed, and I am clearly entitled to show that the defendant is making all this up.
Yes, I think we should hear what these words were.
My lord. Now, could you perhaps just tell us, Sergeant Goss, or give us the inference that was to be drawn from this?
I can't remember.
Then what was it that was so upsetting? Surely you can remember that, Sergeant.
It was. What they were suggesting was that Susan was having sexual intercourse with him.
With the plaintiff, Benny Easter.
Yes.
And in that case, how can you claim that you had no suspicion that your daughter was on sexually intimate terms with Benny Easter?
I didn't want to think about it.
But you did think about it, Mr. Goss. You thought about it all the time. You were obsessed with it. You were obsessed with Benny Easter, were you not?
He was tormenting me.
You were tormenting yourself. You were tormenting yourself with thoughts. Is it not true that you imagined, guessed, and dreaded that your daughter was pregnant with his child?
Yes, I had. I knew she was pregnant, my daughter. She was, or she would be, because I knew that man, that he had picked me out, that he had chosen my daughter, and that he was destroying me through my daughter. He was evil, and I knew I had to fight him. But I fought him with the law. Only with and within the law. And he went for me. That day, make no mistake, he went for me. But he knew he could destroy me better like this. And he may. But he is evil. That's all. Evil.
Now, members of the jury, in this case, the plaintiff, Mr. Easter, is suing the defendant, Police Sergeant Goss, and claiming damages for a civil wrong known as malicious prosecution. Now, it is up to the plaintiff, Mr. Easter, to make out his case. And to make out his case, he must establish that the defendant instituted against him criminal proceedings, and that he did so without a genuine belief that those proceedings were justified. Now, it is agreed that the defendant did institute proceedings against Easter. It is a fact that those proceedings ended in the acquittal of Easter. So the only question for you to decide is whether Easter did assault Sergeant Goss, or whether, as Easter says, he did nothing, and Sergeant Goss arrested and prosecuted him without justification. Now, in the criminal proceedings, the jury were asked whether they were satisfied beyond reasonable doubt that Easter had assaulted Goss. Their answer to that question was no, they were not satisfied. Now, in these proceedings, the burden of proof is different, and the question for you is different. The burden of proof is different because it lies upon Easter, the plaintiff. But he's not required to prove his case beyond reasonable doubt, but only on the balance of probability. So if you think it's more probable than not that his version of events is true, then your verdict will be for the plaintiff. But if you think that Sergeant Goss's version is the most probable, then you will find for the defendant. Now then, if you find for the plaintiff, you must then go on to consider what damages, if any, you should award him. And the damages to which he would be entitled would be the legal costs which he incurred in defending himself in the criminal proceedings in which he was acquitted. Now, he was not awarded his costs in those proceedings, and they amounted to a figure of £500. And in addition, you must consider what you should award him as compensation for the wrong which he suffered in being maliciously prosecuted, and you may award him an additional amount to mark your disapproval of wrongful conduct by a police officer. Now, you will now retire and consider your verdict.
All stand. Members of the jury, will your foreman please stand? Just answer this question, yes or no. Have you reached a verdict upon which you are all agreed?
Yes.
Do you find for the plaintiff or the defendant?
For the plaintiff.
Now, have you decided on the amount of damages, if any, to be awarded to Mr. Easter?
£500, my lord.
Very well. I award Benjamin Easter £500 and the costs to be agreed.
All stand.
Next week, a chance for you to join another jury in assessing the facts when our cameras return to watch a leading case in the Crown Court.